Hello, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Lowell, and with me today is Cat Rambo.
Hello!
Cat Rambo is the president of the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is international, despite the name. She's also author of several short story collections, Eyes Like Sky and Coal and Moonlight, Near and Far, and just most recently, Neither Here Nor There. She's also has out the first volume of a fantasy novel series, the Tabat Quartet, Beasts of Tabat. And as I understand it, we've got the second volume coming up here soon. And I should also say, in interest of full disclosure, that Cat Rambo is in fact my sister. So be aware of that as we go through here. Cat, thank you for coming and talking with the Gauntlet today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to start with what is, to my mind, the greatest of the gaming stories that we have from you, and that is the Grimtooth story. So tell us how you are connected to Grimtooth of Grimtooth Traps fame.
Many years ago, when I was just a wee little gamer and had played Tunnels and Trolls, the magazine that was connected with Tunnels and Trolls ran a contest. And it was a Name the Troll contest. And there was the troll as drawn by Liz Danforth. And I sent in the name Grimtooth. And I won. And so I had a little sketch of Grimtooth, which unfortunately somewhere in the process of the intervening decades has vanished. But actually, Ken St. Andre of Tunnels and Trolls and I are, we chat a lot on Twitter. And I was pleased to be able to surprise him with that story.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, have you run into Liz Danforth herself?
Yes. In fact, Liz and I were talking about yogurt making on Twitter lately.
So you were a young woman in the very early days of D&D, when we're going with the original Brown 3-box edition. You're the person who taught me to play D&D. And you were the first of us to kind of go out. You're a few years older than I, and actually get involved with the local store and with local gaming groups and that. So can you talk about what it was like to be a young woman in those days in this gaming scene?
Well, I think for the most part, it could have been a real horror show. And I was very lucky that the gaming store had a strong female presence who was, I think, watching out over all of us. And in fact, I was recently at a gathering talking with her and found out that much more watching over than I actually had been aware of had been sort of taking place.
Oh, really?
And I found out that, in fact, every once in a while she'd gone to somebody and been like, no, back off. So I really appreciate that. And it could have been really bad, but it was awesome. For me, sure, I ran into people, often not so much harassment, but just sort of an unwillingness to believe that somebody they were attracted to was not attracted to them, and just sort of, and in a very sort of heartfelt, sweet way, where they'd been like, I have decided you are my soulmate. And, usually I did not feel this. I don't believe I ever felt it the same way. So it was interesting in that I think that I interacted with boys in a way that many of my fellow girls did not get to, right? I had a lot of friends who were boys. And I think otherwise in high school, right, they were just sort of this mystical group that every once in a while, it's like in high school, oh, look, there goes, Tom Fellner. Ooh. You didn't interact in the same way. I just talked to, in fact, my best friend from those days, Arturo, when I was back there. And, no, there's no way we would have become friends without gaming together.
Did you, at the table, did you ever feel that bleed of being a woman? Because for a lot of those games, you were the only woman at the table.
Yes. And I have, in fact, vivid memories of someone rubbing my leg while we were at the gaming table and sitting there. And, I was 14 years old and I had no clue what to do, and just kind of sitting there in sort of frozen terror, kind of not knowing. And until finally he stopped, I think, sensing that I was incredibly uncomfortable. To do him justice, that's the only time that anybody sort of ever physically did anything. I don't know. It was a mixed thing, right? I was sort of very lucky in that in some ways I was very socially popular, right? As the only woman in that group, I really sort of had my pick. If I wanted to go out with someone, they were probably going to go, be like, yes,
right.
Here's a reasonably attractive girl who wants, who games, right? But at the same time, I think one of the things about high school, and I know this is true for young women, and I suspect, or at least for young women at that time, and I suspect things have not changed, and that it also holds true for young men, that there is that sort of overwhelming, like, you must find your partner, right? Or you must find a partner, and this is one of the markers of adulthood. This is one of the things that means that you are becoming a grown-up, and you're somehow not becoming a grown-up if you're not engaging it, or you are flawed in some way, right? Only people who are broken don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend by the time. And I will say, one of the things that I really makes me happy nowadays is it seems to me that the sort of the heterosexual mandate is much lessened. And I see many young gay men and women, and I just, they make me so happy because they can hold hands in public. And when I was growing up, oh my God, no, that wasn't, it wasn't possible. And
there were at least one or two within that your greater circle of friends in that gaming community who were gay in and this is the late 70s, early 80s.
Right. And in fact, my best friend, Arturo, found out, it wasn't until we went off to college together that he sort of was like, oh, holy shit, I'm gay. I don't know if can I curse on this, Lowell?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay, good.
So I want to follow up on one detail of that, and then maybe swing back around to that question of the sort of cultural community there. One of the things I've heard talking with Sherry and some other women gamers, that there was definitively for them a sense of at times being sort of undercut as to their authority, seen as not having competency, being gaslit about their reactions at the table, and that it took a long time for them to realize that it wasn't them, that it was the other people. What was your experience with that?
Two experiences spring to mind, and one was that we had a guy who ran games who was a little bit older than us, and a really bizarre dynamic sort of rose where whenever a character died, like a god would happen to appear and be like, I will resurrect this character if that party member sleeps with me. And there was a game that both Stacy, my best friend Stacy, and I were playing in, so it was kind of, equal opportunity sleep with it. But I will say at one point it was kind of like, hey, this is kind of weird. And at that point, he actually, the next time a god appeared, the god demanded Arturo. And I will say, I think there was a certain amount of homophobia implicit in, just that it's sort of like signaling Arturo is different. That's kind of interesting. But another one is I can remember playing in a game, and I don't know if you were playing in this game or not. You might have been, but I think someone that we both know was playing in it, where I was running a character who was like this super strong vampire, because I was dating the game master, right? So I had this incredible character. But there was a friend playing who was constantly like, I'm diving at Cat's character in order to knock her out of the way of harm, right? And he was obsessed with protecting my character. And so my character was constantly doing things like, kill, it was a horrible character. I mean, it was a character capable of like ripping people's heads off and was kind of like, yes. And so it was a really weird dynamic where I kept trying to underscore that I did not need to be rescued and I did not really appreciate being rescued. But this guy just kept doing it over and over and over again.
It's interesting because I had that in games, but until Sherry kind of pointed it out to me when I was GMing, I didn't really recognize that pattern going on between male and female players. But I'm interested to hear that was your experience as well.
There's a kind of weird pressure that happens where other players will be like, my character falls in love with your character, or my character decides that he wants to flirt with your character. And it's this weird sort of flirtation by proxy, right? Because they're not doing it unless they're sort of trying to open up a flirtatious relationship, at least in my experience. Mm-hmm. And the problem with this stuff is it puts you in an uncomfortable position, because if you don't flirt back, you're being a bitch. And I really don't know that guys get subjected to that same sort of, play along or be a bitch dynamic.
No, I could say definitely not. It's actually an interesting thing. I'll swing back to this, but we actually have a lot more modern indie games that talk about safe spaces and talk about interactions and actually have mechanics for handling that such that there's more control over those aspects. Now, this is also the 70s and 80s, early days of gaming. I don't have very good memories of this because I was so young at the time, but what were the peer reactions? I know that's around the time of the Satanic Panic and people freaking out. What was your experience with that?
Actually, luckily our parents were sane enough that they were just like, yeah, that's a bunch of hooey. I don't ever remember either of them coming and going, hey, are you worshiping Satan? One of the things I found out again when I was back there was how many parents had come in and checked out that bookstore because their kids were going to be there for afternoons. And in fact, my best friend Stacy, who I had sort of recruited, I was like, hey, come down, there's boys, right? And partially as, come have my back, which was awesome. But Stacy's parents were very Catholic and they believed in that stuff. And so, Mrs. Mayette, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but all those times that Stacy was coming over to my house, she was actually going down to the Griffin with me to play games, but we weren't worshiping Satan. But yeah, Stacy had to sneak out of the house and had to hide what she was doing. And we were in a Catholic high school, and not just a Catholic high school, but a sort of fundamentalist Catholic high school. So they were very worried about Satan worshiping.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I had no sense of that. Wow.
Look at, they could pull open the monster manual and it'd be like, here's Beelzebub and Asmodeus. If you didn't know any better, you might go, if you believed in that sort of thing, you might go, oh, holy cow, my kid is worshiping the devil.
You mentioned the monster manual and the images there and so on. When you were of the age, that teens age, and you were looking at these game books and such, what was your sense of representation of you as a woman?
I don't think I was awakened enough to kind of understand what I was looking at. There's a lot of stuff that just went completely over my head. And a lot of it involved the art, but stuff like Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Rider stuff, like the kind of rapey stuff. And just right over my head. And then horrified years later to go, oh, holy crap. So yeah, I mean, remember that the gaming stuff reflected the world at large, right? And I was also a comic book reader that was there in the comic books. Television, our Wonder Woman was Linda Carter, who, everybody's like, oh, Linda Carter, look, she's in a bathing suit. So it was just the same as everything else. It didn't stand out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember, and this is tangential to that, but I remember you warning me when I picked up some of the Darkover novels, and you weren't very specific about it, But there came a point at which I was reading, I think, Two to Conquer, and there's a very explicit rape scene in that. And that was the point at which I was like, oh, wait. Oh my God.
This is what's so interesting to me, because you know that many years later, it's come out that Marion Zimmer Bradley and her husband were actually doing some really bad things. But one of the things that I had hit the Darkover books, and there's a passage in there, there's a thing that she always sort of emphasizes, which is this philosophical notion that in a society of telepaths, the person who inspires desire is responsible for it. And that is explicitly said in several of those books. And I knew at the time, I was like, wow, something about this makes me really uneasy. I mean, even as a teen, I was just like, something here is not clicking right. And of course, later you go back with the understanding better, and you're like, yeah, this is justification for all sorts of bad behavior, right? I'm not responsible for it. They inspired, what is this? The basic sort of like, she was wearing provocative clothing. Of course I had to rape her. Jesus Christ,
And there was a certain contingent among the males of the gaming community, I think maybe a little generation after you, where gore, the John Norman stuff was a big influence for them in terms of their thinking about what fantasy worlds were, right?
Yeah. Well, and so, and one of the things you want to remember is there are people who are still huge fans of the gore novels and are actually sort of reenacting the whole sort of Kajira master thing in their own like weird little societies. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to denigrate anyone's sexual practices, but I mean, it was clear to me as a woman, right, reading them that like this just was not reality, because that, you want to talk about gaslighting, the message of those books is over and over. Like, if you're a woman and you don't realize this reality, it's because Earth society has brainwashed you and you secretly yearn to be a slave. And that is overwhelmingly the message of those books. But they also are such sloppy, lazy writing in that, what he does, he's like, oh, I need a backdrop for my society. I'll just use Roman society. And it's like, oh, I'm going to write a new one. I'll go look at Eskimo society. And it's like, oh, now we'll go to Africa. And it's really sloppy. It's just sloppy. And I will say, I was at the age where I devoured every piece of print I could and reread stuff. It's pre-internet days, and I'm a very fast reader, so I reread stuff over and over again. I didn't reread the gore stuff over and over again, but I did read it, and it was kind of like, well, this is one of our father's favorite sayings. There's a particular time to go, and then that was my reaction.
You were very eclectic in your reading habits. You were also pretty eclectic when it came to your gaming choices, because you moved out of D&D pretty quickly into a whole lot of other games. What was that like? What drew you of the other games that you were finding? Well,
I mean, part of it was just that, at the Griffin, there was just always new stuff coming in. And since I was often working as a clerk there, I was opening it up and going, ooh, hey, bunnies and burrows, what's this? I was very lucky because, I was spending, God, what was it, Wednesday, Thursday night, Friday night, and then all day Saturday there. And sure, we mixed it up a lot, right? It would, basically a new supplement would come in and we'd try it. And so, a lot of ICE, what is the Iron Crown Enterprise system stuff, a lot of GURPS, a lot of champions. Like we flirted with villains and vigilantes, and then we found champions. And then for all of us that could shave and manipulate numbers, it was a dream come true. One of my favorites was Toon. I ran a Toon game for a while, which I just loved because it had, do you remember it had that 50% rule where, if the player proposed it, it had a 50% chance of working. And that was hysterical.
And one of the first really collaborative kind of real open to the players kinds of games.
Yeah. And it was about storytelling. I will say many, many years later, one of the things that kind of pulled me back into gaming and realized sort of all the amazing stuff that was happening was not just you, but I got to play Fiasco with a group that included Walter John Williams and Daniel Abraham. And it was the funniest game I have ever played. And my friend Jen Volant, who is another one of the funniest human beings to walk the face of the earth. And I fell in love with the game because I was just like, oh my God, this is fabulous. Mm-hmm. We had so much fun. I wish we had recorded it.
Oh, now was that at a convention that you were at or just?
It was, actually Walter runs this retreat each year where he invites people that he wants to hang out with. And it's also, so it's basically a writing/foodie gathering because at least a few of us are huge foodies. And so each night somebody cooks a fairly elaborate meal. And we workshop in the mornings and do a lot of writing and it was always in that Taos Ski Valley. Really lovely time. And that's how I met Jen. And that's how I met a really good friend that I work with on Sifl, Bud Sparhawk, who's become a really dear friend.
We had a lot of local gaming conventions in South Bend, which seemed really unusual compared to other people's experience. I can't remember, did you go to Gen Con much or to other gaming cons?
I went to some of the original Gen Cons. In fact, it was really interesting. I just went back to Gen Con last year after literally decades away. And, you know, I was there when it was at Lake Geneva. And it's been interesting kind of comparing memories with people and being like, oh, yeah, I was there, too, particularly the women. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, you'll find somebody you remember because there weren't a lot of women, right? Actually, you know, what's cool is I found out I met Jody Lynn Nye, the writer, and she was dating the head of TSR. And she's actually the person who typed out the entire monster manual.
Oh, my God. Back when that was a thing.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the cons? Did you feel comfortable there? What was your experience with that? Because that's a pretty vulnerable space for a woman.
If I can remember it correctly, the ones that I went to, I pretty much stuck with Ken, the owner of the bookstore. And I think, and now that I'm looking back at it, I'm kind of wondering if Ken didn't have a mandate to watch over all the kids that were accompanying him. I suspect probably he did. I don't ever remember a bad experience at a convention.
Oh, that's great.
In all fairness, I am a tall woman. I am a fairly assertive woman. And I think people sense that if they grabbed me, I would probably at least nowadays, certainly not keep silent. And I think, you know, I was not worried about it in a way that may have driven off some people.
Do you think that this experience of being socialized in gaming and having all that helped develop that for you?
I know it did. I absolutely know it did. And I know that one of the things, for me, one of the great things about gaming as a kid was I interacted with grown-ups as peers, right? I interacted with grown-ups who treated me as a peer. And many years later, I had worked with an online game for a long time, a MUD, for which I'm actually sure all gamers will be like, oh, a MUD. Armageddon MUD, still going.
MUD, right.
That's right. So one of my fellow staff members came to me and he said, can I tell you a secret? And I was like, oh, yes, of course you can. And I will say it's out now. It is okay for me to be telling this story. But he came to me and said, can I tell you a secret? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you know when I came on staff? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I was 7 years old. And I was like, what?
Oh my God.
And he was a very bright kid. He was logging on with his dad was a professor at Stanford. And so he's logging on with the stanford.edu account, and people assumed he was a college student. And he said, if there was one thing that really shaped him, it was the fact that he was interacting with all these people who treated him like a fellow adult. And it was actually really funny because he'd be like, yeah, I'd make up what my schedule was. And then Jim would be like, oh, you're taking algebra this week, this year. What are you studying right this week? And he'd have to go kind of research and then come back with some sort of bullshit answer.
Of course, here I've had a number of friends who've had kids that have brought them up in gaming, and I'm always surprised at they are better socialized. They have had to interact, and adults have treated them, they have to solve problems just like the adults do.
Right.
You're all in the same boat.
Well, and role-playing games teach you so much about cooperation and about, like interacting with people and all that basic social skills. I mean, not just problem solving. I think you and I are both aware that it encourages a high degree of problem solving ability. But, in terms of interacting with people, it's a great socializer.
You mentioned Fiasco. Mm-hmm. Have you played any more modern RPGs besides that?
The one that I have played is actually one that you introduced me to, which is Microscope, which I just adore. And then I have purchased games, but I have yet to coax friends into playing them with me. We're actually we've moved last year to an area where there's more people local to us and people don't have to drive for half an hour to get together. So we've been doing a little bit more gaming. I've actually been running a Wild West RPG.
Oh, what do you just... What's
GURPS.
GURPS?
GURPS.
You like the math. They got to go back to that.
The other thing is I have some tricks planned up my sleeve, and GURPS will be highly useful for what I intend to do. And I'm going to mysteriously just mention my bridal party to you, if you remember what you did there. Yeah. I ran your bridal party in a Call of Cthulhu scenario, so that's right.
That's one of my favorite moments.
That was awesome. My geek cred, I didn't have one of those get-togethers with the girls where we all went out drinking. Instead, we all got together and played Call of Cthulhu.
It's interesting. I'm glad to hear that you're running again, because I think that is, for me, it is such a pleasure. And you were always one of the big influences on me. Certainly you ran games for our group as a lovely gesture when we were terrible, horrible,
no, it was fun.
Rugrats, that wanted to kill each other at the table. And you managed to run roughshod on us there. I mean, I was always a very good thing. And again, you let me play with older people, which certainly changed how I approached things. Now, you're doing something with, is it the Emerald City Comic Con or?
Oh, yeah. If anybody is coming to Emerald City Comic Con here in Seattle, be aware that a wonderful charity, World Builders, which is Pat Rothfuss's organization that raises money for Heifer, has a local event where they've brought in a whole bunch of different writers, and you can sit and play games with them. In fact, I'm bringing my spouse, and I put him at Kevin Hearn's table. Kevin is a urban fantasy writer and a fellow Scotch aficionado, so I'm pretty sure they'll hit it off. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And come play D&D with me, because I'm going to run D&D.
Awesome. And when is Emerald City Comic Con?
The beginning of March. It is March 2nd through the 5th.
Excellent. So this episode should be up before then, so that'll be awesome. That'll be great.
Well, if people are at Emerald City Comic Con, please stop by the Wordfire Press booth. I will have, I believe, temporary tattoos to give out.
This episode of the Gauntlet Podcast is being sponsored by our friends at Nocturnal Media. So right now, listeners, Nocturnal is in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign for a game called Cold Shadows. Cold Shadows is a tabletop role-playing game built on the rule set Blood and Honor by John Wick, as well as World of Dew by Werner Wonderworks. Cold Shadows is a narrative tabletop role-playing game where the rules are focused on telling a dynamic, personal, and compelling story. The game is set in a taut world of espionage, betrayal, and drama, inspired by the great spy stories of authors such as Jean le Carré and Robert Ludlum. Cold Shadows is written to evoke the feeling of the Cold War era of spies, both in modern and a historical context. The game can easily be used to tell espionage stories in any 20th and 21st century time frame. I've taken a look at the Kickstarter. It looks great. I've backed it. I'm pretty excited where this game is going because I can't think of too many 20th century Jean le Carré style spy games that have a narrative focus. So this is pretty cool. If that sounds interesting to you, go take a look at that Kickstarter. We will have a link in the notes. And thanks again to Nocturnal for supporting us.
Now, let's go back to Sifl. You're the president of Sifl. You're running for president again.
Yes.
And this last year, there was an interesting shift regarding game writers. And I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yes, we finally realized something that I and a number of other people had been pushing for a long time, which is that our organization is aimed at professional fantasy and science fiction writers, and we feel that the game writers are professionals working in our genre. So we have admitted game writers. That took a certain amount of finagling in that we had to figure out sort of what the qualifications were and how to make them comparable to our fiction writers. But, and I will say the first iteration of the qualifications that went out, I feel were very flawed, and we've addressed that since then. So we have game writers coming into the organization, and we will, in 2018, be giving out the first game writing nebula.
Oh, wow.
We administer the Nebula Awards each year. And that's really interesting. I was just talking to other members of the SFWA staff and board about this, and they were like, how do we determine, what games are eligible and what's not? And I was just like, does the game have writing in it? It's eligible. And so I don't want to, we'll see if this is a good approach or not. But I'm not distinguishing between, say, an RPG and a video game or, even a card game if it's got words on it. I'm going to try that approach. We'll see how that works.
We'll see how it goes.
And that's been my approach all along. SFWA, we try new stuff, and if it works, we keep going with it. And if it doesn't work, we go, oh, okay. And we record it so we don't do it again.
Right.
That's a new practice.
So for a game writer who has some credits and meets the membership standards, what does SFWA do for members?
What does SFWA do?
Yeah.
That is an amazing question. And let me just say, as far as the organization goes, it's not just that I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I am now one of the principal brewers of it, if I can steal something I said elsewhere. SFWA, I think one of the things it offers is a community, right? We have discussion boards that are very lively. We have discussion boards where people are sharing professional information. For example, how to use Kickstarter, how to use Patreon. And we are building connections with those organizations. I am, in fact, going tomorrow down to Amazon to have lunch with our Amazon rep and talk about some of the stuff that's arisen for people publishing on Amazon. We have, with the recent admission of independently published writers into the organization as well, we have really tried to create a lot of ways that our members can promote their work. And so one of the things I've been doing over the past few months is trying to look at all of those and make sure that the game writers can use them. For example, we have a new release newsletter that goes out quarterly. It's like, here's all the new stuff from SFWA members. And it's very easy to say, hey, we need a game section. Here's all the new games from SFWA members. With the recommended reading list that we do for the awards, which is available to the public. Anybody can go if you want to find, kind of what's the great stuff of 2016. You can go look at the current one. We, obviously we need to add a game, a place where people can recommend games. We have an active social media presence, and we try to push our members' stuff. We have a mechanism by which if somebody does a blog post, it can automatically get pushed out on the SFWA authors feed. So it's a lot of stuff like that. But more importantly, there's also two things that I really want to point to. And one is what we call GriefCom, and that is our grievance committee, which you never hear about because secrecy is one of their weapons. But the ninjas of GriefCom actually do a huge amount of stuff, contacting publishers and editors and saying, hey, you are not behaving well. And so if a writer... We do ask that writers have tried to resolve this themselves. We do ask that we're not going to be like, hey, this editor's being mean and I haven't tried to resolve it because I don't want to deal with it. We're not going to swoop in there. But GriefCom is remarkably effective. And I've seen it. One of the nice things about being president is I've seen how effective it is. It is a 7-member crew. They are eager to go after publishers. And basically the thing that I have told them is, I want publishers exchanging anecdotes in bars late at night to be going, hey, don't fuck with SFWA. They will come after you. I mean, honestly, I really kind of want that going on. The other thing that we have is that we do have a grants program that includes the Emergency Medical Fund. for if you have a medical emergency that's preventing you from writing, we may be able to help. We have a legal fund. If you are having legal difficulties related to writing, you can apply to us and we may be able to help. And we have this grants program, which is sort of newly implemented. And we are supporting programs like the Launchpad Workshop, which is aimed at educating science fiction writers so they are using good science. We're supporting a number of reading series. And we are just trying to, as much as possible, make sure that the writers are represented. And I don't know if this is true in game writing, and I suspect it is. In fiction writing, what's happened with traditional publishing is that the writers have become a commodity. There's this whole industry based on making money from them, and not enough money is going to the writers right now, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I suspect the same thing is happening in games. And so, my Don Quixote type quest is to see what I can do about that.
It's certainly been a strong topic of the discussion amongst the writers, and some publishers are very transparent about what they do, and others are less so. So let me finish up with asking you what you want to plug of your own stuff. What do you have coming up? What should people be on the lookout for?
A multiplicity of things. And if you're at Emerald City Comic Con, that is when the second novel is coming out. Hearts of Tibet. So that is coming out. I need to check in with them and make sure this is true, because time is fleeting. I just had a brand new collection come out. It's another double-sided collection based on kind of, the old Ace doubles. And that is Neither Here Nor There, with fantasy set in our world on one side and secondary world fantasy set in other worlds on the other. I teach a series of online classes. I run the Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers, which just added recently a class on writing space opera with Ann Leckie, which is just an amazing class. For $29, you get all sorts of wonderful stuff, and it's online and on demand, so it's at one's own pace. And I do have a Patreon. If people like my stories, if you like what I'm doing and you want to support it, please feel free. I just recently revamped the Patreon campaign, in fact, and people are getting a lot. I've been consistent about this. They're getting a lot, right? The $2 supporters are getting something every weekday, pretty much, a writing tip or resource or doodles. I've been cartooning lately. I've been drawing all these cartoons. It's really weird. So, yeah. So they're the only people getting access, because I don't really want to put them out into public, because they're kind of goofy.
And you also have curated a bundle that's coming up?
Yeah. Actually, I have a steampunk story bundle coming out that I curated that I'm really excited about. And of course, it's partially to shill my new collection, Altered America, which is all steampunk stories. But I have found some amazing steampunk stuff to put in there, such as there's a collection called The Sea Is Ours, which is all Asian steampunk.
Oh, wow.
There's a really wonderful collection of Cthulhu, Lovecraftian steampunk from Broken Eye Books. There's a number of really great novels. In fact, people may curse me. I've managed to get Lindsay Baracker has put in, it's not just one book, but the first 3 books of her Emperor's Edge series, which I just love. So there's a whole bunch more. So be aware. First one's cheap, and then.
Awesome. Cat, thank you very much for being willing to come on and take this time to do this and to talk about your experiences as a woman in gaming, as a woman in speculative fiction, and sort of a thought leader in this field. I really appreciate your being able to do that.
Well, it was a terrible, terrible burden to come online and chat with one of my very favorite people in the world. So,
listeners, that's our show. Thank you very much. You can follow the Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. You can also check out all of our podcasts at gauntlet-rpg.com. We've got the Plus One Forward podcast about PBTA games, Discern Realities, about Dungeon World, our sort of micro actual play series, the comic strip, as well as our main podcast, which this is part of. We also have a YouTube channel you can check out for the Gauntlet that features Dr. Tom the Frog interviewing various game designers. And we have a Patreon at Patreon /Gauntlet. So please rate, comment, and subscribe on the service of your choice. Again, thank you, Cat, very much.
Thank you. Todd, he's just like, let's kill everything. And it's like, we're not murder hobos. God damn it. Fireball, fireball, fireball.
And we're done.
Huzzah!